Hello. John Wesley Bready in this Freedom Whence, England Before and After Wesley, we're on page 230, the chapter on the abolition of slavery. The honor of the initial corporate stand against slavery, both in England and America, must go to the Quakers. Even in the 17th century, they began to protest against this negation of Christianity. In 1724, they passed a resolution condemning both the slave trade and slavery. Quote, in 1758, in step with their brothers in Pennsylvania, they proceeded to warn, and in 1761 to disown all friends, that is Quakers, who continued to participate in the trade, unquote. Richard Baxter, the Puritan, too, in his Christian Directory, had pronounced slave pirates the common enemies of mankind. Daniel Defoe, the nonconformist, in verse and prose, had taken up the cudgels. Godwin, an Anglican clergyman who had lived in Barbados, had invoked vengeance upon the inhuman authors of slavery, while in 1766 the redoubtable Bishop Warburton was to stigmatize from the pulpit the infamous traffic. Such isolated protests, however, were but voices in the wilderness. Britain was profiting tremendously from the slave trade. Enormous vested interests were being established, and so far the conscience of the nation was untouched. Indeed, the revival, which already was spreading over the kingdom, and which finally was to achieve the miracle of abolishing both the British slave trade and British slavery, was not yet really awakened either to the nature and proportions of modern slavery or to the moral issues involved. At this stage, early in 1772, John Wesley noted in his journal that he had just read a very different book by an honest Quaker depicting that execrable sum of all the villainies, the slave trade. The book was by Anthony Benezet, and its effect on Wesley was overpowering. This British slave trade, the evangelist concluded, infinitely exceeded in every instance of barbarity what Christian slaves suffer in Mohammedan countries. End of quote. With characteristic intensity, Wesley now began to accumulate all the information he could, both concerning the slave trade and slavery. 2 years later, in 1774, appeared his Thoughts upon Slavery. That booklet proved to be perhaps the most far-reaching treatise ever written against slavery. Wesley already was the most beloved and influential religious leader in the world of that day. His own eyes had been opened with a shock by Benezet, and later investigations but increased his revulsion. His Thoughts upon Slavery was the revival's manifesto, declaring spiritual warfare against the execrable sum of all the villainies. It committed the thousands of his followers to active, sacrificial effort in the holy cause. But more, it was a trumpet call to every professing Christian, yes, to every lover of man. Dared any honorable person stand neutral while freedom, justice, mercy, and truth were being trampled underfoot for blood-stained gain? Meet it was, moreover, that on this great issue the whole evangelical movement should have been influenced by the teaching and example of the Friends, that is, Quakers. When, by the 5th decade of the 18th century, the power of the revival began to manifest itself in every quarter of the realm, the Quakers, like the other nonconformist denominations, were a dwindling body, struggling for life in the asphyxiating atmosphere of deism. But their remnant was vital, and like the other nonconformist bodies, they too began to experience new hope and vitality from the new faith, while, true to their genius for Christian friendship, they directed their newfound power to the most practical ends. Remarkable affinities indeed existed between the revival and Quakerism. Consecrated lay leadership, including that of preaching, teaching, and spiritual supervision, was at the heart of both. Both gave a pronounced place to the peculiar gifts of women, opening up for them special avenues of leadership and service. Both placed the strongest emphasis on Christian peace and forbearance, on Christian neighborliness and goodwill, and both insisted that Christian faith must ever be tested by its ability to create the fruits of love. Both, moreover, felt that their ultimate citizenship was in heaven, yet both believed that heaven could only be reached by striving faithfully to establish the kingdom of God on earth. But the evangelical revival, more than Quakerism, more than any branch of Puritanism, more indeed than any other movement the English-speaking world has known, emphasized the priceless value before God of every immortal soul. The full implications of this central doctrine were not at first wholly apparent, but from the beginning the movement entertained hope for the hopeless. It proclaimed the sanctity of the humblest labor. It was possessed of a missionary enthusiasm, and proclaiming the world as its parish, it could not discriminate against any color or race among its parishioners. When once the slavery question then was squarely raised, the revival could do no other than proclaim the Negro a child of God, a brother man, an immortal soul for whom Christ died, that he might be free. The slave, therefore, was as worthy of evangelical effort as any prince. The Clapham sect, as we have seen, was symbolic of something entirely new in English social and public life. It represented a lay brotherhood of talented, privileged men who consecrated wealth, power, and time to the things of the kingdom of God. It became the nerve center of the epic movement against slavery. It was a characteristic child of the revival. I'll put in a link to Vivian's discussion of William Wilberforce's book, Real Christianity, which is a playlist now. I'll put the playlist on the screen as well.